Welcome to Post-Crisis Care, hosted by the Asian American Liberation Network. My name is Manushwira Singha, and I'm a mental health advocate. Today, I will be guiding you through a post-crisis care workshop. Before we can begin post-crisis care, it's crucial that you assess whether the crisis is still ongoing. Is anyone in active crisis at this time? Is this an appropriate time to debrief and process? Once you have established that there is no longer an active crisis, you can move forward to the debriefing process. You can now begin creating a safe space for reflection and processing. You want to ask yourself, is it appropriate to process in that physical space? Might that be too triggering for the team or the people that have experienced this crisis event? Every individual is unique and they might process in their own way, so we want to emphasize that there is no pressure to process in that moment. Make sure that you emphasize that processing in this moment is completely voluntary and that there is no pressure for a person to process in that time. Next, you want to make sure you validate the range of emotions that a person may be experiencing after a crisis event. Again, individuals are unique and trauma responses can look different to different people. One person may be completely shutting down while the other person might seem completely fine. It's important not to make any assumptions during this time. Next, you want to identify needs and supports. What are the most important needs at this time? What can be the most helpful and most supportive for your team to process in this moment? Are there any cultural considerations that you have to keep in mind during this time? If an individual decides not to process during this time, are there any professional, personal, community, or spiritual accommodations that can be made for this person in order to support them and their needs? It's also important to recognize strengths and examples of resilience in this moment. What strengths did you observe in yourself, in your team, in your community? And what current tools were helpful and useful during this crisis event? Next, we will discuss physical and emotional regulation and grounding. You want to equip yourself and your team with some basic psychoeducation in order to appropriately recognize and understand common trauma responses, normalize post-crisis reactions, and recognize when additional support may be needed. Let's first define a traumatic event. A traumatic event is any event that causes significant psychological distress to an individual. Vicarious trauma is defined as psychological distress caused by witnessing or repeatedly hearing about another person's traumatic events. What are trauma responses? Understanding and being able to identify common trauma responses will help you support your team during this time. It will also help you connect individuals to additional supports and services based on their needs. The four most common trauma responses are fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. These might sound familiar to you, and you may have experienced these in other circumstances. An individual may exhibit one or all of these trauma responses during the processing period. Let's review each of these common trauma responses and discuss how an individual may respond based on the given circumstances. In a fight response, an individual may demonstrate active confrontation, aggression and anger. They may attempt to control the situation. They might exhibit irritability and frustration, and they might be eager to move towards a threat or a perceived threat. In this given circumstance, this might look like lashing out at other staff members, customers. There's definitely opportunity here for misdirected anger and aggression. The next common trauma response we'll discuss is the flight response. With this response, an individual may be avoiding conflict, might attempt to run away from the situation, might exhibit anxiety, restlessness, and a need to constantly be busy. And in this reaction, you will see an individual trying to move away from the threat. Essentially, individuals exhibiting this response is attempting to evade and escape the situation. The next common trauma response is the freeze response. The freeze response looks like numbness, dissociation, inability to move or speak, analytical overthinking, feeling like you're shutting down, feeling stuck or paralyzed. A freeze response is immobility and shutting down. It's essentially a non-reaction. Given this specific circumstance, this may look like a person's inability to move away from the threat. It could also look like inability to move forward after the threat is no longer a concern. And the final trauma response that we will discuss is the fawn response. This could look like people-pleasing, avoiding conflict, being overly apologetic, having weak boundaries and being overly accommodating to other people's needs, ignoring self-care. A person exhibiting the fawn response is dealing with their trauma by people-pleasing and appeasing the people around them. In this given situation, this might look like somebody worrying about everyone else around them and ignoring their own needs. It could also look like a person saying that they are doing fine when actually they might not be. Keep in mind that people are complex and it's important not to box people in and make any assumptions. I want to reiterate that a person may exhibit one or all of these trauma responses while they are processing. Next, we will review a few grounding techniques that could be useful for post-crisis processing. Grounding techniques can be used for a physical reset, to quickly bring you back to the present moment, calm any overactive or racing thoughts, and reset your nervous system. Keep in mind that grounding techniques are great for physical and emotional reset in the moment, but should not be substituted for long-term therapy and healing processing. The first technique we will review is called box breathing. Box breathing is a simple yet effective breathwork technique that regulates the nervous system, reduces stress, and stops overactive thinking. Follow along as I demonstrate box. The first step is to make sure you are seated straight or standing straight. You'll begin by imagining a box. Inhale through your nose, count of 4 seconds, then keep the air in your lungs for a count of 4 more seconds. Then slowly breathe out through your mouth for a count of 4 seconds. Then hold for another 4 seconds before taking the next breath. Now you have completed your box breathing. Repeat these steps 3 to 4 times or until you feel calmer and feel your nervous system settling. Repeat these. The next useful tool is called the 5-4-3-2-1 method, or the 5 senses technique. This technique engages all 5 senses and interrupts the brain's flight or fight response. This technique is quick and effective and can be done anywhere, anytime. It can even be done silently to yourself in order to regulate your nervous system. To begin, take a deep breath. Consider your 5 senses. Look around and state either to yourself or out loud 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. To begin, take in a deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. Once you feel more grounded in your body, take a look around your environment. Now, list 5 things that you can see. For example, I can see my laptop, the window, the trees outside, the carpet, and my table. What do you see? Let's take another deep breath. Now list 4 things that you can hear. For example, I can hear the wind blowing through the trees, cars passing by, someone talking on their phone, and my laptop keyboard. Let's take another deep breath. Now list 3 things that you can feel or touch. For example, I can feel the pencil I'm holding, the sweater I'm wearing, and I'm touching my laptop. What about you? What are 3 things that you can touch and feel? Let's take another deep breath. Now list 2 things that you can smell. For example, I can smell the lotion I just used and the flowers on my desk. What about you? What do you smell? Finally, name 1 thing that you can taste. For example, I can taste the water I drink. What about you? Another quick and effective grounding technique for a quick reset is to hold ice cubes or either plunge your face in a bowl of ice cubes. This can be a quick reset, again, if there's not a lot of time to process and a person is experiencing continued anxiety after a distressful event. This technique is very effective to interrupt those flight or fight responses that you might be exhibiting after a stressful event. While post-active care can be effective, the most effective approach is a proactive approach. You can do this by creating a post-crisis care plan before another incident occurs. Can you identify vulnerable team members and team members that might need additional support? Can you identify team strengths and also identify areas of empowerment? As basic psycho, it's important to discuss long-term crisis planning should another crisis occur. Establishing long-term care could look like connecting team members to long-term support and creating team plans along with any individual planning that might be needed for additional support and services. It's important to discuss long-term crisis planning. As discussed previously, crisis processing can vary based on the individual. So it's best not to assume that crisis processing is complete within any given period. The best approach is to continue following up after the crisis event has occurred and continue to connect team members to resources as needed. What would this look like? Within 24 to 72 hours of the crisis event, it's best to do individual check-ins as well as team check-ins. After 1 to 4 weeks after the crisis event, you can monitor ongoing trauma symptoms and reassess if support is needed. During this time, you can continue to reassure your team that they have continued access to resources, which includes connection to local mental health providers, any culturally responsive providers, any national resources available as well. Any culturally responsive providers. Given this specific crisis event, it's very important that we are aware of any cultural and equity considerations. We must recognize the historical and collective trauma associated with this specific crisis event. We must honor cultural healing practices and provide resources if possible. It's important to avoid pathologizing any culturally normative responses. We must support and encourage community-centered healing and processing and ensure language accessibility to the best of your ability. As we discussed, the best form of crisis care is a proactive approach. Let's take this time to create an example of a crisis care plan. Keep in mind that you want to emphasize to your team that creating this plan is also voluntary. There should be no pressure to disclose any of this information. Let's begin. We'll first start off with your name. Then we'll add in some emergency contacts that you feel are safe people to reach out to during a crisis event. These could be people that you want to check in with to re-regulate, or it could be people that are willing to come support you as needed. Next, you want to identify when you yourself know when you are triggered. Then you want to identify how others can tell when you are triggered and needing additional support. Next, let's write down some coping tools and grounding skills that can be used after the crisis event occurs. We also want to make sure that we identify any cultural needs in this moment and that others can support you with any cultural accommodations. It's also important to discuss your strengths and also identify your areas of need in this moment. Next, you will describe how you would like to be followed up with after the crisis event. You can identify whether you would prefer to be followed up with individually or with a group. You're welcome to put both as well. Finally, we want to identify what long-term care looks like for you after the crisis event occurs. Make sure a variety of resources are identified. This includes local mental health providers, crisis lines, peer support groups, any culturally responsive providers, and national resources as well. Again, this crisis care plan is a tool for temporary care after a crisis event and should not be substituted for mental health crisis care plan or long-term care. Again, there should be no pressure for your team member to share this crisis care plan with any other team members. If the individual is comfortable doing so, they can share this care plan with team leaders. The other option is for the individual to keep this crisis care plan to use as a resource in the event of another crisis event. Similarly, you can create a group crisis care plan to help with processing after a crisis event. This should be done collaboratively with your team, and it could be made available as an additional resource for processing. By this time, you should have a better understanding of what post-crisis care and future preparedness could look like. Let's review what was discussed. Immediately after a crisis event, you want to ensure physical and emotional safety. Then you can begin the debriefing process. At this time, you can validate the range of emotions. You can discuss strengths and moments of resilience, and then identify needs and supports. Once debriefing is complete, you can move on to the physical and emotional regulation and grounding. This includes understanding basic psychoeducation and reviewing some grounding techniques to reset and re-regulate. Next, we discussed adaptation and future planning should a similar incident occur. This looks like taking a proactive approach and establishing long-term care. Next, we discussed what follow-up care would look like after a crisis event and the need to continue to connect team members to resources as needed. And of course, throughout all of the processing, we must keep cultural and equity needs in mind and consideration. That concludes this workshop. Additional resources are available at the Asian American Liberation Network. You can visit their website at aalnsac.org.